Chapter 29, Adjectival Participles. What? Was ist this? Adjectival Participles? Adverbial participles I know, but who are you, adjectival participle? We will find out. The adjectival participle. Here's a good example. The flying squirrel is a nutty animal. We've seen this before. Squirrel is a noun. What kind of squirrel is it? It's flying squirrel. So we've got here what could be a verb, fly, and we've put the ing on it to make it into a participle, modifying squirrel, hence an attributive participle. An attributive participle is a kind of adjectival participle. Also, like an adjective, a participle can be substantival. So here we have an example that does not involve a participle, but does involve a substantival adjective. According to Plato, achieving the good, which could be an adjective but here is used as a noun, is humanity's highest end. Substantival adjective. So also with the participle. Now this is hard to do in English, but Greek does this all the time. A substantival participle. So you'd have something like, the running guy is my grandfather. And just like a substantival adjective, you would have the participle alone. Here it would be articular, and because it's not modifying anything, you would know it's substantival. And then finally, a predicative participle. The bird is what? The bird is flying. So it's like a predicate adjective. So when we look at adjectival participles, the best approach here will be to go back and review uses of the adjective, because the participle is functioning almost identically to the way that, or the various ways that adjectives function. So you remember attributive adjectives, and there's something very important that was introduced in this discussion that seemed unimportant because it seemed a little tedious, but in fact is extremely important and comes up all the time in almost any Greek sentence in the New Testament. The difference between attributive position and predicate position. So we have this notion of positions, and what this has to do with is the position of the adjective in relation to the noun, and even more specifically, the position of the article with the adjective and the noun. So what we call first attributive position is when you have article adjective preceding an anarthrous noun. And this is going to mean the good man, which looks pretty predictable and is very close to the English word order. In fact, it's the same as the English word order, the good man. You also have second attributive position, where now the article and adjective comes after the noun, where the noun itself is also articular. So ha-anthropos, ha-agathos still means what? It still means the good man. Why? Because this is still an attributive adjectival position. You have an adjective with an article. It just happens to come after the noun this time, but it's still the good man. Third attributive position is when you have the noun followed by the article and adjective, but the noun is anarthrous. So what do all three of these have in common? Answer, that the adjective always has the article. Whether the noun has it or not, if the adjective has the article, it's an attributive position. And therefore the adjective is functioning as an attributive. What kind of man? The good man. A substantive adjective occurs when you have an adjective alone with no noun or substantive to modify. So ha-agathos would be not the good, but the good man. How do you know it's the good man? Because the article and the adjectival ending itself both tell you that this is masculine singular. And because it's masculine, we know that it's a man and one man, singular. Whereas hey agathe, because it's feminine singular, you could say the good woman, even though we have no noun there for woman. And both of these need to be contrasted with predicate adjectives. There are two positions here. First predicate position is when the adjective comes first, but how is this different from attributive position? Now the adjective has no article. Regardless of whether the noun has one, if the adjective doesn't have it, it could be in predicate position. Second predicate position is when the adjective anarthrous comes following the noun. Now you could have a situation where the noun and adjective are anarthrous, And in that case, you'd have difficulty deciding whether the adjective was attributive or predicate, but context is going to be your clue for making that decision. Okay, so translation of adjectival participles. Your first clue that you're looking at an adjectival participle and not an adverbial participle is that an adjectival participle will often be articular, whereas an adverbial participle cannot be articular. The article will help you identify whether the participle is attributive, substantival, or predicate using the criteria that we just viewed on the previous slide in relation to adjectives. The same will apply for participles. Again, like adverbial participles, adjectival participles encode aspect. So it will be continuous aspect for a present participle, undefined aspect for an aorist participle, what we call stative aspect for a perfect participle. And again, like adverbial participles, adjectival participles do not encode absolute time, but only relative time. Again, same time as the main verb, before the main verb, or before the main verb with present consequences. Nothing changes there. What will be a little different here is your alternative translation for a participle. So a present participle, which often uses ing, that's one possibility also for translating an adjectival participle. Only now your alternative, instead of using that when or since alternative where we turn the participle into a subordinate clause, now we have the option of converting the participle into a relative clause. Remember relative clauses? The relative pronoun in English, who, which, that. So let's look at some examples. Here, what kind of participle do we have? Well, it's adjectival, so we have three options: attributive, substantival, or predicate. Which is it? The answer is attributive. Why? Because it agrees in gender, case, and number with some noun. So we've narrowed it down to attributive or predicate. Moreover, the participle has the article. It's articular, so it's going to be an attributive position. So what kind of man? The man speaking. So the man speaking to the crowd is my teacher. Now what kind of participle do we have here? Notice that the participle tone diacontone does not have any noun with which it agrees in gender, case, and number. It's just the participle alone. So this must be substantival, where the participle is standing in as a noun. So pray for the ones persecuting you, the people persecuting you, the men persecuting you. And again here, there's actually nothing for to thalanti to modify. Even though soy is also dative singular, in this case the dative singular participle is not modifying that, so it's a little tricky. But the participle would be to the one wanting. And then you have to go to this infinitive, to the one wanting to go to law with you and to take your tunic. My question is, if he's going to take your tunic and you're also going to leave him your cloak, that leaves you kind of awkward. So let's look at this alternative translation that we can use for adjectival participles. So the man speaking to the crowd is my teacher. Now we've said that you can expand an attributive participle into a relative clause. So this is how you would do it. Instead of the man speaking, you could say the man who is speaking. Now converting this into a clause. Okay, it's got the relative pronoun at the beginning. It has a verb in it. And if it's got a verb in it, it's a clause. This is a relative clause. Now notice, this is completely legitimate alternative translation because a relative clause functions adjectively with respect to the antecedent. So what kind of man or which man? The man who is speaking. So we still have a participle functioning like an adjective in our translation. Perfectly legitimate. Here, pray for the ones persecuting you. Again, you could convert this into a relative clause, and what would you say? Pray for the ones who persecute you. And there's our relative clause. And here, to the one wanting to go to law with you, instead you could say, to the one who wants to go to law with you. All right, so don't be tripped up by this attributive position business. There you have an attributive adjective, an adjective with the article, the good man. Here we have an attributive participle. It's exactly the same structurally, isn't it? You have article, substantive, article, adjectival form, right? So here it's an adjective, here it's a verbal adjective, what we call a participle. So the man who is speaking, where who is speaking is a relative clause functioning like an adjective as a participle functions. So translating participles is one of the trickiest things to learn in Greek. And one reason for this is that there are a number of different ways to translate it. You can translate it on a more word-for-word basis. And typically, if you have a present participle, for example, you're just going to use an ing rendering in a single word to render the participle. But we also have this option of expanding the participle based on the context. So we saw that we could use a while or after ing translation. So after praying or something like that. And we could expand that even further based on the gender and number information in the participle, which tells us the agent. If it's a he, you can say while or after he was praying. So both of those apply to adverbial participles. Whereas with adjectival participles, as we've just done, we see that we use, instead of some kind of subordinate temporal or causal clause, we'll use a relative clause. So who is or was praying? Are you kidding me? Does this ever get any easier? Yes. If you stick with it, it gets easier. And you'll be glad. And God will be pleased with you. Let's finish up. Repeat. Dekamai. Dakeo. Estio. Pimpo. Pharaoh. Boom. 78.46%. Awesome stuff. You're going to have to work with these participles. Don't let them kill you. You kill them. Okay? You're going to kill it on the next quiz.